It's where the horses run a little faster. The bourbon tastes a little better, and the nostalgia runs a little deeper. Kentucky. A land that's been hailed as a paradise for centuries. A place where legendary pioneer Daniel Boone was first awed by the sweeping beauty of its valleys and forged a wilderness trail that gave hope to the thousands who settled the American West. It was from one Appalachian valley that a coal miner's daughter went on to become a country music superstar, leaving behind a land now transformed by giant machines that carve off entire mountains above to get to treasure below. It's a state that tried to stay out of a war, but became so divided that fathers fought their sons and brothers fought each other. Aerial Kentucky tells the rich stories of America's 15th state. A place where the bluegrass still grows, an American classic still races down back roads, and where tens of thousands come to try and beat the odds during the fastest 2 minutes in sports. All this right here in Kentucky. It's easy to tell when spring finally arrives in Kentucky. Sunbursts of canola flowers blanket the fields, and colorful eastern redbuds signal the start of a prosperous growing season. Native Americans found the perfect hunting grounds here. There were lush forests filled with deer and beaver, and meadows of wild grass. Grass that may have inspired the state's name. The Iroquoian word for meadowland is Kentucky. But by the late 18th century, European settlers also had their eyes on Kentucky's riches. As the eastern colonies grew more and more crowded, many there dreamed of having a new piece of this paradise to the west. But the first who tried to venture here quickly found out that settling Kentucky wasn't going to be easy. In 1774, a small group from Pennsylvania managed to paddle into Kentucky. They named their new settlement Harrodstown after the expedition's leader, James Harrod. They built a fort for their protection and started clearing land to farm. But frequent conflicts with Native Americans forced the settlers to hunker down inside the fort. Men, women, children, and livestock all lived side by side. Smoke from cooking fires filled the air, and diseases spread like wildfire as the Shawnee attacked the settlers again and again. Within a year of their arrival, they were forced to abandon Harrodstown and leave Kentucky. But despite that initial failure, the promise of Kentucky's riches proved impossible for others to resist. One of those would become an American legend, a former soldier and explorer named Daniel Boone. Boone first arrived in Kentucky on a hunting trip in 1767. One day, after setting up camp, he climbed high on a rocky ledge, some say it was this one, to take in a view of Kentucky's untouched landscape. Today, many continue to follow in Boone's footsteps, clambering up to rocks like these in Pilot Knob Nature Preserve to look out over a stretch of Kentucky that has remained virtually unchanged for hundreds of years. To the south, the wild land that stretches out below has been named the Daniel Boone National Forest. It covers more than 1,000 square miles of rugged land along the Appalachian foothills. Winding through this wilderness is the Cumberland River, and anyone who paddles it upstream will come face to face with one of Kentucky's great natural treasures: the raging waters of Cumberland Falls. It plunges 70 feet in an impressive torrent that draws thousands every year. And rising above the tree line is another Kentucky landmark, a stunning sandstone formation known as the Natural Arch. When Boone's initial hunting trip in Kentucky was over, he returned to his family in North Carolina, laden down with hundreds of pelts and tales about his travels in a new western land. Soon, more and more settlers from North Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia were eager to claim a slice of this new paradise. The problem was, there was no real way for large numbers of people to get there. Traveling through the Alleghenies on foot like Boone had was one thing, but navigating this terrain with carts and carriages weighed down with people, supplies, and tools was almost beyond imagination. That's because an impressive barrier stood in their way. In the early 18th century, the Allegheny Mountains, which stretch from northern Pennsylvania to southern Virginia, were the biggest obstacles to settlers trying to reach Kentucky and the West. But in 1750, an explorer named Dr. Thomas Walker discovered a narrow passageway through the forbidding Alleghenies, a notch between two mountains that's now known as the Cumberland Gap. Today, it lies near where the borders of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Virginia all meet. In 1775, a wealthy businessman named Richard Henderson hired Daniel Boone to forge a trail through the Cumberland Gap. Henderson's plan was actually to create his own colony in Kentucky, which he wanted to name Transylvania. Boone and his men soon arrived here at the Cumberland Gap, axes in hand. They started hacking their way across the mountains, creating a path that would later be known as the Wilderness Road. That path still exists today for those wanting to retrace the journey that thousands of early settlers first took to reach Kentucky. After 2 weeks, Boone and his men finally made it to the other side of the mountains and chose a spot for a new settlement. They called it Boonesboro. Today, a reconstructed fort stands on the same site. Soon, hundreds of pioneers were pouring through the Cumberland Gap, heading up the Wilderness Road and arriving in this frontier outpost. Boone stayed on to protect the settlers from Indian attacks, but one day while hunting, he himself was captured by members of the Shawnee. Held by the tribe's chief Blackfish, Boone quickly discovered that a Shawnee force was planning to attack the Boonesboro settlers. Winter turned to spring, and Boone was unable to warn his companions. Finally, in June, as the Shawnee made their final preparations to lay siege to the fort, Boone made a daring escape. Legend has it he crossed 160 miles of near impassable wilderness in just 4 days to reach Boonesboro before the Shawnee. When the Shawnee finally did attack, the settlers were well prepared and armed. For 10 days, they held their ground until the Shawnee finally gave up and retreated. Boone's real-life exploits were quickly turned into fiction by newspapers and magazines in America and England. In print, he became a larger-than-life hero of the American frontier, leaping off cliffs in his coonskin cap to escape capture by native tribes, and leading hopeful pioneers through dark forests to the light-filled bounty of the West. "With me, the world has taken great liberties," he later said, "and I have been but a common man." But Boone was a hero to many of the settlers who flooded into Kentucky on the trail that he had first forged. These pioneers in turn carved their own new communities out of the wilderness. Communities that might have looked a lot like this one. This village, called Mountain Home Place, offers a glimpse of what life was like for early Kentucky settlers. there's a simple white church, a school, and houses and barns to protect people and livestock. Building a community like this from scratch was back-breaking work. Settlers had to cut down whole swaths of forest, clear the earth of boulders to make fields, and saw trees into boards, beams, and shingles to build houses and barns. This kind of work was happening all across the American frontier. But Kentucky settlers would discover that their labors brought special rewards. Under the grass in which their cows and sheep grazed lay an ancient geological treasure that still provides Kentucky with amazing riches to this day. "50 miles south of Louisville, Kentucky, stands one of the most secure buildings on Earth. Inside is more than 147 million ounces of gold, worth close to $200 billion. This is Fort Knox. With granite walls 4 feet thick and a 22-ton blast-proof door, Fort Knox is the most secure vault in the world. It's not a good idea to get too close, even from the air. If the guards in its towers need backup, there are 30,000 soldiers and 300 tanks standing ready at the Army base next door. Only one man has ever tried to break into Fort Knox. His name was Goldfinger, the villain from the 1964 James Bond film. He devised an elaborate plan to detonate a nuclear device and liquefy Fort Knox's gold. The filmmakers weren't given access to the vault, but they were allowed to film exterior shots from the air. The gold in Fort Knox may be a national treasure worth billions, but for many of those who live here in Kentucky, their most prized resource lies right beneath their feet. It was discovered by settlers back in the early 19th century. It turns out there was a secret ingredient in Kentucky's soil that dates back more than 300 million years. Once, the southeastern United States, including the area that's now Kentucky, was covered by a shallow sea. Over millennia, shells from billions of sea creatures accumulated on the ocean floor, hundreds of feet thick, creating a bed of calcium-rich limestone. When the waters finally retreated, this limestone formation was covered by earth and still exists today, hidden beneath Kentucky's forests and fields. But there is a place where this limestone labyrinth can be explored, here at Mammoth Cave National Park. Under these trees is the longest known cave system in the world, more than 350 miles of caverns that lie under 80 square miles of Kentucky. It's now a United Nations World Heritage Site. But these calcium-rich limestone formations beneath the ground provide something very important to animals and people on the surface. They're why the grass that grows here is full of nutrients and helps build sturdy bones in the animals that graze in Kentucky's fields. This superfood is known as Kentucky bluegrass, even though it's actually deep green. It was named for its blue flowers that emerge in spring. Thanks to its healthy soil, Kentucky is the perfect place to raise a racehorse. At Calumet Farm in Lexington, thoroughbreds feast on bluegrass to their heart's content. Distinguished by its miles of crisp white fencing, this legendary stable was founded at the turn of the century by a baking powder magnate whose family raised some of the 20th century's most fabled racehorses. Triple Crown champions Whirlaway and Citation both wore the devil red and blue silks of Calumet. And 8 other Kentucky Derby winners once grazed these fields. It's not by chance that Calumet and its legendary horses are located here, just outside Lexington, a city known as the horse capital of the world. First established in 1775, it was named in honor of the first Battle of the Revolutionary War in Lexington, Massachusetts. In the beginning, This was no more than a rough and tumble outpost on what was then America's western frontier. But that quickly changed as settlers flooded into Kentucky. Within 30 years, mansions lined Lexington's streets, and the city was known as the Athens of the West. But the story of how Lexington became America's horse racing capital begins downtown. This is a monument to the man who helped organize Kentucky's very first horse race, statesman Henry Clay. In 1787, Clay and a few others decided to sponsor a race of horses right through Lexington's streets. Many here considered this predecessor to modern drag racing a nuisance, and it was later banned from town limits. At the time of Clay's first race, Kentucky was still just a judicial district of Virginia and was not yet its own state. Matters of law and order were settled here in nearby Danville in the district courthouse. Starting in 1785, the courthouse became the meeting place for delegates working to hash out a constitution for a new state. In 1792, that constitution was ready, and Kentucky was born as America's 15th state. Just 2 years later, the state of Kentucky had its very first racecourse. It lay here on this estate south of Lexington, built by William Whitley, a frontiersman famous for his clashes with Kentucky's native tribes. He designed his home with walls 2 feet thick and windows high above the ground to thwart Indian attacks. This also made the house a safe and popular meeting spot for early settlers. He even put his initials over his front door, WW. But it was Whitley's racetrack that would make horse racing in America different. He wasn't a fan of British customs, so he decided that horses on his track would race counterclockwise, against European tradition. All race courses in America have run counterclockwise ever since. Just as they do here at Keeneland Racecourse in Versailles. If this grandstand looks familiar, it's because the 2003 hit movie Seabiscuit was filmed here at Keeneland. Every morning all year, jockeys breeze down the stretch here, training themselves and their powerful thoroughbreds for the state's richest races. Like the Bluegrass Stakes, which takes place at Keeneland every April with a purse of $750,000. But even these big winnings don't compare to the sums of money spent buying horses at Keeneland's Auction Pavilion. 4 times a year, buyers from around the world come to bid on Kentucky's fastest thoroughbreds. In just 5 days in January 2013, 1,105 horses sold here for over $45 million. All who bid are betting on a dream with poor odds of coming true. Only about 20 of the 26,000 thoroughbreds born each year in America will make it to the Kentucky Derby. The most sought-after animals sell for millions of dollars. But in 2006, one winning bidder at Keeneland struck gold with a pregnant mare named Supercharger, which he bought for $160,000. Her new home, Windstar Farm, lay just down the road in Versailles. The next year, Supercharger gave birth to a foal named Super Saver. Today, that foal is one of Kentucky's most prized racehorses. In 2010, the then 3-year-old thoroughbred made this farm proud when he won the Kentucky Derby. In the final turn on a muddy track, he charged up the rail, pulled away from the pack, and galloped under the wire for the win. Today, this stallion has entered a new phase of his career as a world-class stud, breeding about 130 mares per year and earning as much as $20,000 per foal. Money that the farm plows right back into its horses. Mares and foals get royal treatment here in Kentucky, and the most promising young racehorses are tested every morning. Called breezing, this daily routine helps build lung capacity in promising horses and helps jockeys train horses to respond to subtle cues. First, Trainers trot twice around the track. Then they turn and gallop for one final loop. It gets the horse's heart pumping to help trainers determine how fast it can recover after a sprint. All part of a meticulously managed conditioning routine required to train these four-legged athletes for real competition. For many here in the rolling hills of Woodford County, working with racehorses day in and day out has been a way of life for generations. Just as mining has for those living in Kentucky's hills. After the Civil War, Kentucky's coal-rich hills exploded with life as trains and factories across America demanded more and more coal to run. Across Kentucky, men and machines raced to scrape this fossil fuel out of the ground. They worked in giant mines like this one, the Blue Heron. It operated right up until 1962, belching dust as it dumped coal into railroad cars below, earning the mining company that owned it millions. But life was tough for the miners who worked these hills. Coal barons set up their own small towns. This one was named Barthel Camp. Miners and their families had everything they needed: housing, groceries, a barber, and even doctors, provided by the company they worked for, but at a steep price. With each expense the miner paid, he handed a piece of his paycheck right back to the mining company, until nearly everything he earned fell back into the company's coffers. The hardship of a coal miner's family inspired one Kentucky woman to make it an anthem of country pride. Music star Loretta Lynn grew up in this narrow valley known as Butcher Hollow, where her childhood home still stands. In her 1970 single, Coal Miner's Daughter, Lynn sang about how her family may not have had much money, but had all the love they needed. The song was a huge hit and inspired the 1980 movie starring Sissy Spacek in an Oscar-winning performance. Both the song and film helped humanize the plight of coal miners everywhere. Loretta Lynn's home is one of several stops along a route known as the Country Music Highway that winds through the Green Mountains of eastern Kentucky and was named as a tribute to local superstars like Dwight Yoakam, Patty Loveless, and Billy Ray Cyrus. It leads to Ashland, where two of the biggest recording artists in country music history had their humble beginnings. Before she was a star, Naomi Judd played music at Ashland's Baptist Church. At 18, she gave birth to her daughter Winona, here at King's Daughters Medical Center. After years of struggling, Winona and her single mom hit it big, catapulting to fame as two of the top-selling country artists in history. Like many before them, the Judds sang of their nostalgia for their old Kentucky home. The state's beauty has inspired many ballads. But some fear that Kentucky's beauty is under threat. It's possible to soar through valleys like this one without realizing what's happening above. But if you skim the treetops, you'll come face to face with one of the largest industrial operations in the world. A mining technique that's been described as strip mining on steroids. It's the start of a new shift for a series of giant earth-moving machines and their operators. They're on their way to carve the entire top off an Appalachian mountain. It's a process known as mountaintop removal. That's because mining companies literally lop off entire mountaintops to get to rich seams of coal below. Before they can start, loggers move in to strip the mountain of trees. After explosives loosen the rock, bulldozers start carving away the top of the mountain itself. From the air, it looks like a giant sandbox, except every one of these machines is supersized. The Appalachian Mountains are more than 300 million years old. Now, these 3 bulldozers alone can chew their way through an entire peak in just a few days. They remove the earth so that valuable seams of coal can be mined from above, instead of digging underground tunnels to get that coal out of the mountain. Understanding how this modern mining technique works is best done from the air. All the earth dug up by these 3 dozers has to go somewhere. First, it's loaded scoop by scoop into Cat 797s, one of the biggest dump trucks in the world. Each one costs more than $5 million and can carry a payload of 380 tons. One after another, these mega machines dump the earth carved from the mountain into nearby valleys. Watching mountaintop removal in action, it's easy to understand why this mining technique is so controversial. The Kentucky miners who work these machines can earn a good living, but environmentalists and many in nearby communities claim that this extreme type of mining is devastating ecosystems and polluting nearby rivers and streams. Mining companies claim they restore the mountains when they're done, shaping them into terraces and then covering them with grass to look natural. Some former mountaintop removal sites are even used to graze cattle. But when all is said and done, the ancient peaks that once stood here are gone forever. To the north of Kentucky's coal-rich hills, the Ohio River flows along the state's border with Ohio. Many of the small towns that line this river date back to the earliest days of settlement, including one that's been home to a family of famous entertainers. One of them achieved stardom in Hollywood, but never forgot his Kentucky roots. When his film The Leatherheads was released in 2008, actor George Clooney organized a special screening here in Maysville. A red carpet was rolled out in front of the Washington Opera House, and Clooney and his co-star Renee Zellweger were on hand to greet the sold-out crowd of 300. There's a good reason that Clooney chose this small town. Both of his parents were born here. His great-grandfather was the town mayor, and it's also where his famous aunt, actress and singer Rosemary Clooney, had the premiere of her film, The Stars Are Singing, in 1953. She grew up in Maysville, dreaming of all that might lie down the Ohio. From the porch, the river promised better times coming, she later wrote. Faraway places just around the bend. George Clooney grew up 16 miles away in the town of Augusta. His ambitions weren't limited to acting. After graduation from Augusta High School, he tried out for the nearby Cincinnati Reds, but never made the team. One of the faraway places that Rosemary Clooney might well have dreamed of downriver was this one, Louisville, Kentucky's largest city. A place that's given birth to plenty of its own legends, including one who was born in this modest white house, a boy named Cassius Clay, later known to the world as Muhammad Ali. Today, an entire building here in Louisville honors the fighter's legacy, the Muhammad Ali Center. It was on Louisville streets as a teenager that Cassius was taught to box for self-defense after having his bicycle stolen. And it was in Louisville that he had his first professional fight in 1960, here at Freedom Hall. His win in the 6-round battle against Tunney Hunsaker launched his career. 20 years later, crowds were still flocking to Freedom Hall, where the University of Louisville Cardinals basketball team won 2 NCAA titles in 1980 and 86. The team has since moved across town to the KFC Yum Center, which opened in 2010. Louisville is known for boxing, basketball, and baseball. Fly over the city, and it's hard not to miss this Louisville icon, a larger-than-life bat that's been hitting them out of the park for over 120 years. According to legend, the Louisville Slugger was invented in 1884 when a woodworking apprentice named Bud Hillerick offered to make a bat for a local ball player named Pete Browning, who was in a hitting slump. Browning immediately started getting hits thanks to his new bat's lightweight and signature shape. Fans soon nicknamed him the Louisville Slugger, a name the bat company trademarked just 10 years later. A larger-than-life baseball bat may be one way that Louisville has staked its claim to fame, but for millions of sports fans around the world, Louisville is known for something else. an annual event many call the most exciting 2 minutes in sports. On the first Saturday of every May, tens of thousands of fans arrive in Louisville, Kentucky for one of the most legendary sporting events in the world. It draws more than 16 million television viewers, but lasts just 2 minutes. The Kentucky Derby. It happens, rain or shine. This year, 151,000 people have crowded into Churchill Downs, the historic racetrack that's hosted the Kentucky Derby since 1875. 2 weeks of parties and events lead up to this legendary race. It began in 1873 when Colonel Meriwether Lewis Clark Jr. returned to Louisville from Europe, freshly inspired by European jockey clubs. He wanted to create something similar in Louisville, a place that could showcase Kentucky's finest horses. So he leased 80 acres from his uncles John and Henry Churchill and named a new racetrack in their honor, Churchill Downs. With its annual mint juleps, fancy hats, and blanket of red roses for the winning horse, Churchill Downs has always been a place of time-honored traditions and iconic architecture. The soaring twin spires of its grandstand are recognized around the world. The most prized seats at the track are these, just feet from the finish line. They sell for thousands of dollars each, but on the infield, it's standing room only. It's finally race time. Each jockey parades in front of the grandstand to give the crowd one last look before they place their wagers. With more than $131 million in bets riding on this one race, the slightest change in a horse's or a jockey's behavior could sway the odds. But on this rainy day, it's truly anybody's race, which is why the air is electric. As soon as the last horse is in the gate, the race is on. From the moment they burst out of the gate, pacing is critical. Thoroughbreds can only maintain their peak speed for a quarter of a mile. And since this track measures a mile and a quarter, each jockey has to decide exactly when to unleash his or her horse's speed. Push too hard early, and a horse will tire too soon. But wait too long, and it might be too late to pull ahead. And on a rainy track like this one, it's impossible to predict which horses will perform best. Just as the jockeys enter the final stretch, a horse named Orb kicks into a new gear, fights his way up from behind, and closes in on the front runner. A surprise move from the outside that pays off. Orb is the first to pass the white marker of the finish line, winning the Derby. His time, 2 minutes and 2 seconds, almost 3 seconds shy of Secretariat's 1973 record, but a victory worthy of a big celebration. Orb's owner will take in $1.4 million. Orb's jockey, 28-year-old Joel Rosario, gets a 10% cut. But it's not only jockeys who earn their fame and fortune here at the Kentucky Derby. In 1970, a literary journal sent an unknown writer to cover the race. It would be the beginning of a long and infamous career for Hunter S. Thompson, father of gonzo journalism and inspiration to daring young writers everywhere. At the Derby, Thompson teamed up with illustrator Ralph Steadman for the first time, but the two were more interested in the people at the Derby than the horses. "It's a fantastic scene," he wrote. "Thousands of people fainting, crying, trampling each other, and fighting with broken whiskey bottles." After a weekend of their own heavy drinking, Thompson and Steadman became an inseparable team. They created the cult classic Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which became a major motion picture starring another Kentucky native and friend of Thompson, Johnny Depp. Hunter S. Thompson's birthplace, the city of Louisville, was first settled in 1778 as a river port. As trade on the Ohio boomed, the land along the river became more and more valuable. By 1818, land speculators and the U.S. government had their eyes on a big piece of this land to the west. The problem was, it was owned by the Chickasaw Indian Nation. So President James Monroe sent a delegation to try to force the Chickasaw to sell. One of those delegates, Andrew Jackson, negotiated a price of $300,000 for the land. that would be added to the state of Kentucky. Known as the Jackson Purchase, it was bordered on 3 sides by rivers. To the west was the Mississippi, to the north, the Ohio, and to the east, the Tennessee. 12 years later, the Chickasaw tribe was forced to relocate to Oklahoma on the Trail of Tears. Today, the Tennessee River, which was once a major trading route for the tribe, has been transformed. A giant hydroelectric dam turned the river into Kentucky Lake. A second dam on the nearby Cumberland River created Lake Barkley. The land between the 2 lakes is now a national recreation area, and the reservoirs themselves are popular places for boating and fishing. But not everyone on Lake Barkley is here for a good time, especially those doing time here at the Kentucky State Pen. This may look like a medieval fortress, but it's actually the oldest prison facility in Kentucky, built in 1889. Locals often call the state penitentiary the Castle on the Cumberland. It houses Kentucky's only death row. Its execution chamber was used as recently as 2008. If this prison's walls could speak, they would have plenty of colorful tales to tell. That's because the state pen dates back to a time when many of Kentucky's rural communities were ruled by honor and family pride, not by law. A time when feuds on the Kentucky frontier were settled with violence and blood. Some of these feuds have been the stuff of legend, like the one that erupted on Kentucky's border with West Virginia, here along the Tug Fork River that divides the states. Some say it all started in 1878 in a valley like this one, when Randall McCoy of Pike County accused Floyd Hatfield of West Virginia of stealing one of his hogs. It set off tensions between the 2 families that were often fueled by family gatherings and whiskey here in these Appalachian hills. One argument over a debt of $1.75 led to the killing of a McCoy. A revenge attack led to 3 more deaths. On August 29, 1887, Nat Hatfield wrote a letter warning the McCoys. "We have been told by men from your county that you and your men are fixing to invade this county for the purpose of taking the Hatfield boys. We have no particular pleasure in hanging dogs, but we know you and have counted the miles and marked the tree." Finally, on January 1st, 1888, the Hatfields took matters into their own hands. They traveled across the Tug Fork River, surrounded one of the McCoys' houses, and set it on fire. Then, they shot the McCoys as they ran from the flames. When Sarah McCoy tried to protect her daughter, she was beaten so severely that her skull was crushed. Miraculously, she survived and testified against the Hatfields here at the Pike County Courthouse in Pikeville in 1889. Spectators crowded in, hoping to get a glimpse of the bloodthirsty mountain desperados. The jury sentenced 8 of the Hatfields to life, but it was a man named Ellison Mounts who got the death penalty for killing Sarah McCoy's daughter. The Hatfield-McCoy feud got a lot of press at the time, which is a big reason why it became the stuff of frontier legend, even though killings like these were common across eastern Kentucky after the Civil War. But despite the backwoods violence that flared across the Appalachians, Kentucky was still seen as a land of liberty, and always had been. In the late 1700s, a group of 44 Shaker missionaries arrived here, hoping to create their own heaven on earth at a place they called Pleasant Hill. They constructed unadorned buildings to reflect their values of humility and simplicity. Like the Quakers, Shakers worshiped without a minister. They believed that each member had access to the divine spirit, and when it moved them, they shook, danced, and marched around the room. Since the Shakers practiced celibacy, they relied on an influx of new converts to maintain their numbers, which made them adept recruiters. They hosted mass camp meetings in the woods, known as the Great Kentucky Revival. These vibrant gatherings were like an early American Woodstock, without the free love. thousands of young pioneers and frontiersmen sang and danced for days on end and listened to impassioned speakers preach of equality, communal living, and the need to preserve the virtue of the land. In the years leading up to the Civil War, the Shakers welcomed former slaves to join their community as equal members and even bought some slaves in order to free them. But there were many others in Kentucky who didn't share the Shakers' abolitionist sympathies, including one named Jefferson Davis, who became the President of the Confederate States on February 18, 1861. A few months later, the Kentucky legislature met here in the old state capitol in Frankfort and voted in favor of neutrality in the war. But that neutrality didn't last long. Kentucky's geographic location made it hard for its citizens not to take sides. To the south and east of Kentucky lay the slave states of Tennessee and Virginia. To the north, the free states of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. This meant that Kentucky was sandwiched between the Union and Confederate armies. Each wanted control of the state and its rivers, which were key transportation routes at the time. In 1861, Abraham Lincoln reportedly said, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." Within a year, Louisville had become a major staging ground for Union troops. As 80,000 soldiers flooded into town, bars and brothels sprang up on the city's riverfront. In September 1862, the threat of a Confederate attack on Louisville forced thousands to evacuate. Many crowded into boats and fled across the river to Indiana. The attack never came, but battles flared elsewhere in Kentucky and led to heavy casualties for both sides. By the end of the war, tens of thousands of Kentuckians had died, most of them fighting as Confederate soldiers. Often, the dead were hastily buried where they fell, but some from both sides were laid to rest in small hometown cemeteries, like this one at Pisgah Presbyterian Church in Versailles. Today, much grander memorials mark the roles that Kentucky natives Abraham Lincoln and Jefferson Davis played in the war. Here, near Lincoln's birthplace in Hodgenville, a Beaux-Arts structure rises at the end of a stairway with 56 steps representing Lincoln's age when he died. The memorial was paid for by the donations of more than 100,000 citizens, school children, and businesses from across the North and South. Inside stands a reconstruction of Lincoln's famous childhood cabin to remind visitors of the 16th president's humble beginnings here on the Kentucky frontier. 100 miles away, a memorial of a different kind was constructed in 1907 to honor Jefferson Davis, who died in New Orleans in 1889. This 350-foot-high obelisk was built in Davis's honor by the Daughters of the Confederacy, and like so much else in this state, it stands on a bed of Kentucky limestone. During the war, Kentucky brothers had fought their own brothers and fathers their own sons. But in 1942, more than 70 years after the end of the war, Kentucky adopted the state motto, "United we stand, divided we fall." And this belief in the power of standing united has a long history in the state, especially here in Berea. Back in 1855, an abolitionist preacher named John Gregg Fee founded a new college 30 miles south of Lexington. Berea College was the first in the American South to offer integrated classes for whites and blacks, many of whom were ex-slaves. It was also co-ed, another radical idea for the time. The college thrived after the war, but in 1904, Berea College was prohibited by Kentucky law from teaching black and white students in the same classrooms. It wasn't until 1950 that the college was permitted to return to its mission of providing an integrated education for blacks, whites, men and women, and to live up to the state's motto, United We Stand. It may be called the Bluegrass State, but vast stretches of Kentucky are completely covered by trees. Trees that hide treasures of Kentucky history that are best spotted from the air. Like this legendary farmhouse west of Louisville. It's the childhood home of a man known as the father of bluegrass music, Bill Monroe. Under the shade of this porch, the Monroe boys played the fiddle and guitar. Bill, the youngest, took to the mandolin, like his mother, who died when he was just 10. Legend has it that so much music was played in this house over the years that the fibers of the wood in its walls and rafters resonate like instruments themselves. With his 1939 band, the Bluegrass Boys, Monroe traveled the country, combining elements of gospel, blues, folk songs, and old Irish fiddling to create a new genre he described as high, lonesome sound, a sound that's known to the world as bluegrass. Today, just down the road from Monroe's old farmhouse, in the town of Rosine, musicians still gather every Friday night to honor Monroe's legacy and celebrate the heartfelt and nostalgic music that grew right out of Kentucky's soil. Bill Monroe was born in 1911, but his family first settled in Kentucky in the 1830s. By then, another rural Kentucky tradition was in full swing. An invention that was already being boiled, fermented, and barreled all across the state, Kentucky bourbon. Woodford Reserve is the oldest bourbon distillery in the state, dating back to the late 18th century. It's one of many distilleries located on Kentucky's Bourbon Trail, including popular brands like Wild Turkey, which dates back to 1869. When Prohibition hit in the 1920s, Kentucky's bourbon makers were forced to close, except for one, thanks to some crafty repackaging. The Buffalo Trace Distillery here in Frankfort sold its bourbon for medicinal use only, or at least that's what its labels claimed. These days, Kentucky's bourbon business is thriving, from small new craft distilleries to established names like Four Roses, which is now owned by a Japanese liquor conglomerate. The reason that Kentucky bourbon is famous around the world is its consistently distinctive taste. That's because Kentucky bourbon makers have to follow 4 strict rules. First of all, their bourbon has to be aged in new, charred white oak barrels, which can spend 10 years or more in buildings called rack houses, like these. It has to be made from at least 51% corn. It can't have any added coloring, and it has to be between 40 and 80% alcohol. But there's one more thing that gives Kentucky bourbon its unique taste. It turns out that the same nutrient-rich limestone that helps thoroughbred horses grow into champions also makes the liquor here better, since it helps filter impurities from the water. Most Kentuckians would probably agree that bourbon is the unofficial drink of the Bluegrass State, just as thoroughbreds are the official horse, and as My Old Kentucky Home is the official state song. But unlike most states, the Commonwealth of Kentucky also has an official car. And it happens to be one of America's most coveted speed machines, the Chevrolet Corvette. A group of Corvette devotees is hitting the back roads with cars that date from the 1960s to today. This legendary speed machine is produced nearby at GM's assembly plant in Bowling Green. Today, more than 400 workers build about 11,000 Corvettes a year. That may seem like a lot, but it's nothing compared to another Kentucky-based automotive giant, Toyota. This is the largest Toyota plant outside of Japan. It covers an area the size of 156 football fields and employs 6,000 workers, along with hundreds of robots. Every 55 seconds, on average, a new Camry, Avalon, or Venza rolls out of this plant through one of these doorways and heads up to the parking lot. Then, each one is driven onto a railway car designed specifically for automobiles. When the train cars are full, they head out to ports across the country, since most Kentucky-built Toyotas are shipped overseas. $4.4 billion worth of automobiles are exported from this state each year. Just one more example of the riches of the Bluegrass State, where nature inspires awe. Hardy pioneers once beat the odds, and thousands still come eager to win. This is the colorful, rugged, wide-open land of enduring traditions, Kentucky.